equipping you to navigate your grief journey after child loss. This is the Hope After Child Loss podcast. On each episode, we explore the many challenges of grief as guests share their stories of loss. It's also a place where you will hear about God showing up in our darkest moments and restoring meaning, purpose, and hope to shattered lives. Welcome to the latest episode of the Hope After Child Loss podcast, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Greg Buffkin, and in this episode, I'll be talking with Kim Peacock, Nicole's mom, and author of Victorious Heart, Finding Hope and Healing After a Devastating Loss, which we'll be talking about later in our conversation. Originally from Southern California, Kim and her family now reside in Mount Juliet, Tennessee. Now, here's my conversation with Kim. Well, Kim, welcome to our podcast today. It is so great to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I feel really honored to be here.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, but I think the truth of the matter is I'm the one who's honored to have you.
Well, thank you.
I've been looking forward to this conversation. Kim, what I usually do with all of my guests at the beginning of the episode is just to give them the platform for a couple of minutes and let you share anything that you would like to about yourself or your family. So here you go. It's all yours.
Okay, sounds good. My husband and I have been married 40 years.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And for both of us, it's our second marriages.
Yeah.
He came to the marriage with our daughter, Angelise, and I came to the marriage with my daughter, Nicole. And so we thought, okay, this is it. We have the little happy family. We got married. We did have a little bit of a whirlwind romance. It's a funny story, but I worked at the church and the pastor came in one day and he goes, well, Kim, how about you call that Larry Peacock? I hear he's getting a divorce. So I don't know if that's super kosher or not, but it did what I needed to do.
Yeah,
so, yeah,
that's cool.
So I called Larry, and our first date was to Harvest Christian Fellowship down in Riverside, California. That's Greg Laurie's church.
Yeah,
he's from the Jesus Revolution, and
right.
That church really awakened my heart for the Lord. Before, we went to a Southern Baptist church, and it was great. We loved the church, but it was a little more legalistic and a little more, I felt a little condemned because I had been married before. I don't think it was them. I think it was me.
Yeah.
But I had that mentality. So when we went to Harvest, I just felt free and I was able to rededicate my life to the Lord. It was amazing. So we ended up getting married about 6 months later. And I know everybody was nervous because they're like, this is going way too fast. But we really knew, and Larry really loves the Lord. And I knew we would have some bumps because we both were coming, having a blended family is not easy. It can be complicated.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah. After we were married for a couple of years, I got pregnant and I was excited to have a third child, but we found out it was an ectopic pregnancy.
Oh.
So we lost that baby. And I know it's not the same as a miscarriage, but I feel like it is the same as a miscarriage. And it really gave me a heart for those mamas who lose their babies in womb because you don't have all of the memories that
right.
And it was on the same day I found out I was pregnant, the same day I found out it was an ectopic pregnancy. So I was very, very sad. And it took me a while because that was my first bit of grief. That was my first dipping my toe in of grief because my parents were both alive. Larry's parents were both alive. And so not too long after that, maybe about a year, I got pregnant again. And that time she was in the right spot. And that is our daughter, Megan. She's our only biological child.
Okay.
But we love them all exactly the same. I need to preface that because she is just precious. And she's the only one that has both of our genes.
Yeah.
And so then I thought, okay, so now we're where we're supposed to be. we have a little family. And I went to a church in Sacramento, and it was a woman talking about Russian adoption. And so I was overwhelmed with emotion when she was talking. And I thought, Lord, are we supposed to adopt from Russia? And so I mentioned it to Larry, and he's like, no, I don't think we are. He said, maybe we're supposed to give to missions. And I said, okay, well, maybe I'm reading it wrong. I am a feeler, so I go by feelings. So I do trust him. So he said, I'll pray about it. So he prayed about it for about 4 years. And then he told the Lord, but he was hearing Russian adoptions everywhere. And he said, okay, Lord, if you want us to adopt from Russia, when I turn on this radio, I want have it be about Russian adoptions. And believe it or not, it was about Russian adoptions. And
God does have a sense of humor,
yeah,
does he not?
He does. And that is very not typical of our lives. Our relationships with God have been more just following his word, going by his prompting. They haven't been that dramatic. So he came in and he goes, guess what? So we contacted this lawyer that we knew that handled Russian adoptions. So we got all approved, and we flew to Moscow December 6th, 1997, and got our little guy. What we didn't realize at the time is when I went to that church service, it was about, I can't guarantee it's the same day, but it was about the same time that I went to that church.
Oh,
so
wow.
we feel like he was our son from beginning. And oh my goodness, he's such a great young man. He struggled because any adoption brings trauma. And
Sure.
He's in an orphanage, but I am so proud of him. He loves the Lord. He's a police officer. He is just a wonderful young man. And he's married, and they just gave us our 11th grandbaby, which I had for a few days.
Right. You and I were talking.
Yeah.
So that's the grandbaby.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
congratulations.
Thank you. She is amazing. It's so fun to see her because I feel like I'm seeing him.
Of course.
Because we didn't get to see him as an infant. And it's really special. So then we thought, okay, this is it. This is what, we're supposed to do. We went to church. I tried to be the good Christian little girl. I tried to do all the right things. I was very much into doing because I had lived a rough life in my teenage years. I thought I had to make up for that. And I felt I didn't have that. I felt some shame about that. And so I just meant to do everything perfect.
Did you discover you couldn't do that?
Yes. I discovered about a year later after we adopted Alex that no matter how perfect you are, bad things happen, hard things happen. And the Lord doesn't reward our good behavior because our good behavior is like nothing, but he gives us what we need, and he covers us. Our obedience to him is protection. But at the time, I didn't understand that.
Yeah, I know we both understand this, that we're thankful that that he's patient with us and his grace covers a lot of things. So I appreciate you sharing that. And what I'd like for you to do too is to tell us about your sweet daughter, Nicole.
Okay. Well, Nicole was the oldest by birth and with our family. And it just so happened she was only a year older than Angelise. So she was just one of those amazing, wild and free people. And when I say wild, I don't mean in a rebellious way. I mean so free. It's the kind of wild that we all want to be. She was not inhibited by opinions of others. And she actually, which is funny because she really cared about others. And usually when we have a heart for other people, a lot of times that can rule us.
Yeah.
But with her, it didn't. She was able to love people unconditionally, but still do her own thing. And she wasn't afraid to say what she meant. And she wasn't afraid to say the truth. And I really respect that. More in hindsight now, I guess I didn't realize it as her mommy because she was very compliant to me, very respectful. And I had Nicole for 2 years with just her and I before Larry and I got married. So we
Oh,
were
wow.
very close, and she just was the light of my world. And I really just loved watching her grow. And she showed horses, and she was a fierce competitor, and she was very good at what she did. But her goal was not to win every class. It was to make a friend at every horse show that she went to.
What an
And yeah,
incredible goal.
yeah. And now I have on Facebook, I'm terrible about Facebook, but on Facebook, I have a ton of young ladies that are now moms, and a lot of them are still showing their trainers, and they are a part of that family. And they always send me pictures when they find them of Nicole. They remember her. They are just so gracious to me.
Man, those are the kind of friends that everybody who goes through something like this really does need. Unfortunately, some don't have them, but man, I'm so thankful that you did.
Mm-hmm. I really realized that's not a byproduct of anything I did. It's a byproduct. It's like Nicole was taking care of me ahead of time. And
Yeah.
I know that that's not always the case. And I know a lot of people don't get to experience that. But the Lord knows I am such a wimp, and he knows. And he gave me that for as an example, because she would do whatever it took to help somebody. Sometimes it scared me because she put herself in hard situations sometimes, and it worried me because she's this little tiny redhead, little tiny girl. And so,
That's a mom's heart talking. And I have to take issue with something that you just said.
okay.
You said that you were a wimp. I don't believe that for a second. And I say that because I know about your ministry. And the other aspect of that is that we're talking today, and neither of us knows how many people are listening. We don't know who it is that's listening, but I love the fact that you leaned into your pain and your grief, and instead of just insulating yourself, you decided that you would cooperate with the Lord and let him use your story. And that takes courage. I think it takes also that caring about other people that you were describing about Nicole. So I think I know where Nicole got a lot of her character.
Well, thank you. That's very kind. I appreciate that.
Well, I'm just speaking from what I've observed.
That's very sweet.
I know that it's been a while since you lost Nicole, but we also know that grief absolutely does not have an expiration date.
Yes.
It changes, of course.
Mm-hmm.
The acuteness of it begins to wear off, and it becomes more of an underlying chronic type
Mm-hmm.
of emotions and feelings. I think we carry through our entire lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
But let's talk a little bit about how that grief does change, because I know there are people listening today that are in a fresh season of grief, and their world has just been turned upside down, and they feel the pain that they feel right now is that crushing pain that happens in the early stages. And sometimes when you're there, you feel like it's never going to end. It's never going to feel any better than it feels right now. You can't imagine that. You know what I'm talking about. So I want you to talk a little bit about what that was like for you, Kim, and how you started processing something that was so nightmarish. And then let's bring this further into the future and what that grief looks like today as opposed to how it looked in those early days. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. It makes great sense. And it's a great question. In the beginning, after we witnessed the accident that took Nicole's life, I felt like I was drowning constantly, and I could not get my footing. I could not, we were at the hospital, and we were out of town, and I was just spiraling down into the pit. And my husband, Larry, said something to me. He said, Kim, don't let Satan in. because he knew what this had the potential to do to my heart.
Sure.
And so when the doctor came in and told us that she had passed away, we were with extended family. Most of the kids were there, and we just fell into a heap after he told us. He brought the chaplain in there, and they don't know where we are with the Lord. So the chaplain asked if we wanted to say the Lord's Prayer, and I said no, because I remembered what Larry said, don't let Satan in. And what that told me, the only way to keep Satan from destroying me, and he can't take my salvation. But he can sure make me drown in my grief. And there were days I felt like I was drowning in my grief.
Oh, I'm sure.
But I think the very first step that we took was praying from our hearts and just giving our pain to God. It did not make everything all peachy and wonderful, but it gave me a direction. Okay, this moment, I'm going to walk forward and I'm going to pray. And I'm going to take another step and I'm going to pray. And I did feel like I was going to drown. But I liken grief to, it doesn't, like you said, it does not go away. However, it changes. And it's like when you lose a limb, someone who's lost a limb, you have to learn to walk again without that limb. If it's your leg, you have to walk without it. It's your arm,
right.
You have to learn to function. And those kids are a part of us. No matter what circumstance it is that we've lost them, they are still part of us. And so we have to learn to walk in that new normal. And what that is every day pushing forward in our pain. And there were days I sat in the car and I would go out by myself and I would just scream my head off. I just was in so much agony. And I just really felt like the Lord was saying, keep walking. You're going to be okay. He surrounded me with really good people to love on us and to protect, to help us. But the Lord also created, a kind of shock. I call it an epidural, because you don't feel, you don't feel everything all at once. And aren't you glad? Yeah. I'm so glad we don't feel everything all at once. It would be when the wave would hit, it would be painful, but it wasn't all at once. He was that's his protection over us.
We'd never survive that.
No, we'd be crushed under the weight of it for sure.
Yeah. I remember reading something that you had written, and I'll quote you. You said, when Nicole went to heaven, darkness invaded our world, and we wondered if our family would survive the crushing pain of grief. And that's what you're talking about.
Yes. And that's how I felt. I thought, I don't know. We had the other kids that we needed to help walk through it when we were drowning. And every time I would get a foothold, another wave would hit us. So it was very difficult. In the earlier days, it's more sharp and raw. And now, 26 years later, it'll be 26 right after Christmas. It still hurts, and I still miss her, especially the holidays. She passed away 3 days after Christmas. So, Christmas has taken on a new meaning, but I've learned every time we have a loss, I've learned to apply the things that he taught us before. There hasn't been a loss as dramatic as losing Nicole. Both of our parents have passed away, but they were older and they lived a full life.
But it's an expected loss too.
Yes. Yeah. And when we lose other people and other things, it is like another layer on top of our already tender heart.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Earlier this year, we had a fire. Our outdoor building, our workshop got struck by lightning and it burnt down.
Oh, gosh.
I not only had some of Nicole's crates still out there with all of her show ribbons and different awards from her horse shows, but all of our Christmas decorations. And so I am grieving that loss now, what is it going to look like? Lord, help me not to cling to those things, but to remember every single one of those memories are still there. Every memory we had of Nicole, every memory we had of my parents, Larry's parents, the kids, every bit of that, nobody can take that away. And
of course,
so.
But it's still hard to lose those those things that I'm sure for you guys became treasures.
They were.
Anything that's associated with our child.
Yeah.
Those become treasures. And I cannot imagine how much that must have hurt when you lost those things in the fire.
Yeah, it was very, very sad. And they were treasures. And after Christmas, after she passed away, the following year, I really had to lean into Christmas because I didn't really want to do Christmas. I mean, and I think we should all do what the Lord has calling us. Everybody's different. So you may not want to celebrate Christmas, but we did something completely different. And we were able to go up to the mountains but we didn't put up our regular decorations or anything like that. But I felt like the Lord was saying, I'm not going to let this steal this precious holiday from you.
Sure.
And so with the fire, I still feel like he's telling me that. And it's hard because because I pressed in, I had a lot of Christmas decorations. And so, this week is the week I would normally put those up. I just really feel like the Lord's telling me to be simple and to be careful.
Yeah. And I've had this conversation, a similar conversation with other parents who have lost children. And, one of the things that I'm sure that you like I would like for those who are listening who have not yet been through that year of firsts, which includes, the holidays. And those are probably amongst the most difficult, probably right up there with your child's birthday. And I love what you said, that it's what works for you and your family. Sometimes others have a tendency to expect that we carry on with our family traditions. I think sometimes it's because they want that and they think that it would be best for us to, and then you fill in the blank.
Yes.
Unfortunately, it doesn't always work that way. And what might have been your favorite part of that Christmas and Thanksgiving celebration, that season, sometimes those things that you associate with your child being a part of it, they can become extremely painful to think about walking through again. So, we know people who've kind of like you guys, they adopted a totally different tradition. They made a new tradition. Kathy and I carried on with the same traditions that we always had because for us, it was comforting. And it was what we thought Ryan would have wanted us to do had he been here. And so I just want people the folks that are listening to understand there's no right or wrong way.
Correct.
It's just what works best for you and your family. But you need to have a conversation about it because not everybody in your family may agree. So you just have to come to some kind of consensus so that it works for everybody.
I think that that's really important, not to let the pressures of the culture press us into doing things that we are not comfortable with. Whatever that is, and that's also in grieving. Grieving looks different for everybody. And we need to be careful not to expect someone else to grieve the same way we do.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, that does happen to people all too often. But you do have to create boundaries for yourself and for your loved ones, because if you don't, other people sometimes can try to impose again what they think might be best for you. And it might not be easy to set those boundaries in the beginning. And it doesn't mean that what you decide as a new tradition is what it's going to always be. Correct, it may look different next year. It might look different 5 years from now. But whatever it is that brings you comfort, I think is what you need to consider.
I completely agree.
I do want to have your perspective on this too as well, Kim. When we're in that initial grieving phase, that's where we're still in shock and disbelief and barely able to function, we feel like we've got COVID brain fog on steroids. And it's just hard to even think about how we're going to carry on with our normal everyday life, as we always refer to it.
Right.
How did you process all of that? All of that's swirling around in your family, in your own heart, in your own mind, and begin to process that. And how did your faith play a role in that?
It was immediately that I knew I would not survive if I didn't hold on to the Lord. And it was interesting because my physical Bible became a lifeline. I carried it everywhere, all the time. I still have that Bible. And it was and I couldn't concentrate. The problem is, like you said, the COVID brain, it's very hard to concentrate. And I couldn't read scripture or memorize scripture or anything like that. But it's funny, that physical Bible next to my heart, the Lord did something. And because I was clinging to it, clinging to his word, then he would help me take the next step. But one of the things that I really had to do was with the kids, recognize that they all grieved differently. And I wanted them to know that they had to lean on the Lord, but I also knew that their little hearts were not maybe mature enough to handle, especially the younger two, were
Sure.
not mature enough to process. But what is funny is Alex, he was 5, so we had adopted him from Russia a year prior. At the hospital, Larry took him into the hospital, and Larry said, okay, he went to the restroom, and there was some other people in there, and Alex asked Larry, he goes, Papa, where is Nicole? And Larry said, well, she's with Jesus, Alex. And he goes, oh, is she happy? And Larry goes, she's very happy. And Alex said, okay. And
Oh,
that is amazing to me, that I have thought about that often, how just that unconventional trust that he had to the Lord.
yeah, yeah. And we adults could take something from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, they're just they don't complicate things.
Mm-mm.
What a better world it would be if
Yeah.
adults had that simple faith of a child.
Yes. Yes, exactly. I've thought about that answer way back then. And he actually, even though he struggled in life sometimes, his faith was very black and white. Now the other kids, the other girls, they had a different relationship with Nicole, so it was harder for them. But we tried to, do the best that we could with guiding them daily, taking them to church and making sure they were surrounded with godly people. And when they were willing and ready, we found some Christian counselors because they didn't want to talk to me about grief, because they didn't want to hurt me.
Of course.
And so it was a safe place. It's very important to find biblical based counseling, because that's where our hope is. And just scripture, reading scripture every day. That verse in Thessalonians that talks about we do not grieve as those who do not have hope.
Exactly.
And I love that. So it acknowledges, yes, we grieve, and it's hard, but we don't grieve without hope. There's always hope.
And that changes everything.
Yeah.
I cannot imagine losing a child and experiencing that level of grief and pain and not knowing that we have that hope,
Mm-hmm.
not only in our daily living, in our relationship with the Lord, but also that hope that, and when I say hope, I mean the certain hope
Mm-hmm.
that Scripture talks about, the
Mm-hmm.
certain hope of knowing that if our child knew Jesus, that we will be reunited with him one day.
Mm-hmm.
And that just knowing that they're with him
Mm-hmm.
and they're no longer here, they're not facing the challenges that
Mm-hmm.
that life presents here, they're not facing the temptations that that we all go through, and the things that
Right.
just the hurt, the pain, and everything else that goes along with with
Mm-hmm.
living here in a broken world.
Right. Right.
And Kim, you've got 26 years to look back on this and speak from. What would you say surprised you the most about grief and how it changes people?
Mm.
Because we know it does.
Mm-hmm. It does completely change us. We are altered. It doesn't mean that we never experience a part of healing, but we are altered forever. We just, again, like we talked about earlier, we learn to walk in our new normal with our part of our heart gone. But what surprised me the most is I really thought I would look up the stages of grief and how, okay, I must be in this one. I must be in this one. And back then I thought that those were hard pressed stages of grief. Now I
Right.
know that they were just guides and not necessarily accurate, and not accurate for everyone.
And they
And
don't come in chronological order either.
no, and that's what I expected. I thought, okay, I'm in shock. Okay, pretty soon I'm gonna be here. And so I would move forward and think I was in the next stage, and then all of a sudden a wave would hit me and I'd go back. And I'm like, oh, I'm failing at this grief thing because now I'm back to shock again. So I think that it's really important to know that we all, and this is very important for me to let everyone know, we all grieve differently. And even
Absolutely.
though we grieve with hope, everybody feels it differently. Everybody copes with it differently. The Lord has made us so uniquely wonderful that why would we all grieve the same when we're so uniquely diverse?
Yeah.
So that
true.
surprised me for sure, is the stages of grief. I thought, because I wanted to grieve correctly. And so I thought, well, I got to do this right because this is a pretty big deal. And there is no correct way to grieve.
And the last thing that you need when you're grieving is to think that you're doing something wrong, because that just adds a whole new level of grieving the fact that you got it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And feeling all of this anxiety over that when you're dealing with all this pain.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important for people to understand it's a broad brush description,
Mm-hmm.
and not everybody experiences all of them.
Mm-hmm.
We don't experience them in any particular order. So please don't compare yourself with how somebody else is grieving and where they are in that process of, the 5 different steps.
Right.
The important thing is to lean into it. As we walk through those things you referred to a minute ago as the waves that hit us, I think nowadays people are talking about it more in terms of triggers.
Mm-hmm.
But we've talked about it like you, Kim, that you feel like maybe you're out of that place of living in shock.
Mm-hmm.
And just not being able to do anything but barely function.
Mm-hmm.
So you feel like you're making a little progress, and all of a sudden something triggers an emotion. It triggers something. It can even trigger something physical.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so let's talk about some of those things that for you were triggers, because I think people that are listening may not necessarily know what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. I think music, a song, because a song will go straight to our heart. A smell, our sense of smell is so powerful, and it will take us back exactly to that moment. If I smell something that reminds me of Nicole. And for me, and everybody's different with this, but because she showed horses, it was the scent of a horse, the barn. When we moved to Tennessee, we left our 2 elderly horses. We sold one of the horses, but we left our 2 elderly horses with a friend of mine because I just thought it was too much. And so she took care of them until they both passed away. She was so gracious. And that was a lot for her. But for her, it was healing. But for me, it would have been hard. Now, the cool thing is, 2 years ago, I was able to get a horse for myself. And
that's great.
And it was really cool. And it was really freeing because I remembered, okay, I loved horses before Nicole went to heaven. Just because I stopped investing in my horse stuff for the kids, but I could still enjoy the horses. And so it's really cool. So that was a good trigger later, where that kind of shows how the triggers change over time.
Right.
In the beginning, just the smell of the barn was just very painful. The smell of the horse. And I love it now. I love to go out there now. But it changes.
Yeah. I love how the Lord does that. The things that initially were so almost debilitating,
Mm-hmm.
and where you feel like, you're never going to have joy in your life
Mm-hmm.
again. You're
Mm-hmm.
never going to enjoy a lot of things again.
Mm-hmm.
And as God heals our hearts over time, he doesn't take away the pain. He doesn't take
Right.
away the grief or that process.
Mm-hmm.
But over the course of that process, he does heal our hearts. And the things that, as you said, that used to hurt so badly now don't hurt like that and can actually
Mm-hmm.
bring us joy again. It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
when you thought about your child in those early days, most
Mm-hmm.
of your thoughts are centered around the death of your child.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
like you, we're now 9 years into that process. And when I think about Ryan now, it brings me joy
Mm-hmm.
to talk about him. It brings me joy to think about him. I
Mm-hmm.
can laugh about things that he did because he
Mm-hmm.
always tried to make people laugh.
Uh-huh.
And those are things that I would laugh about to his face if he were
Yeah.
sitting here with me today. But I want people that are listening today who aren't there yet to know that will come.
Yes.
But
Yes.
you've just got to take it a day at a time
Mm-hmm.
and walk through the grief. You can't escape it. Don't try to mask it, and don't try to cover it over. Just walk through it.
Mm-hmm. And don't let other people's expectations push you. Like, I think we all have had someone say something to the effect, well, aren't you over it? It's been 9 years.
Oh,
It's been 10 years. And
yeah,
it's just so painful when they do that. They don't understand. I'm sure
they
they
don't.
mean well, but it's important not to let that mentality, or, well, they're with Jesus in heaven, so it's so great. You should have joy. That is also true, and that gives us hope, but it doesn't take away the pain.
No, it doesn't. You have to be careful when you're speaking to somebody who's lost a child that you avoid saying things like "you
Right,
should"
right,
and then
right.
fill in the blank, because it just does not work that way.
No, no.
Let's talk about another aspect of grief that probably most people are not familiar with, especially those who haven't walked through something like this. And that's that whole subject of future grief. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you experienced there? Because it's a very real phenomenon.
Hmm. It is, and I think that comes to that point. We have to remember that it's not a linear journey. It's very up and down. Our grief is up and down, up and down, up and down, until we can, well, all of a sudden say, okay, I'm experiencing a bit of healing and peace. But also not to remember it's linear, because if we think that it's linear, if we go back, then we're going to be hard on ourselves. So, and to recognize we're always going to grieve for our child. It is important not to allow ourselves to get stuck in that grief. Now, I am definitely not saying that we don't grieve, but I think that it's important. We have to work really hard to continue to walk forward and move forward, because that's where the healing is moving forward. And then layers, when my parents passed away, I experienced, it was piled on top of Nicole's. When our workshop burnt down, it was piled up, and I experienced different things. Sometimes with the grandkids, it just hits me out of nowhere. Oh, I wish those kids could see their Aunt Nicole. She would
Yeah.
spoil them rotten. When somebody gets married, or we ended up adopting 2 more boys after she went to heaven. And she would have been such a good aunt to those boys. They were a handful. And so it was really, they talk about Nicole as if they knew her, but it's important to continue talking about her, talking about the Lord, and keep moving through each step with that.
Yeah, that is very true. And that's another thing that can be painful for parents who have lost a child is sometimes people who are on the outside. I mean, it could even be extended family members for that matter,
Mm-hmm.
who are very cautious about and sometimes err on the side of not doing it, but to talk about our child, to use our
Mm-hmm.
child's name in the course of everyday conversation so that you keep their memory alive. Because you and I both know that Nicole and Ryan are more alive today in heaven than they ever were here.
Yes.
And so we try to always talk about Ryan in present tense.
Yes.
Because he is still living. And so everybody that knows us, our friends and family members, they all know they don't have to tiptoe around that subject. And we laugh in the course of conversation when we're together with friends. We'll laugh about things that Ryan did or that Ryan said, as though he were standing right there in the same room.
Yeah.
And so if you're listening today and you have a friend or family member who's lost a child, don't be afraid to talk about them. Ask those parents about maybe one of your favorite memories. And if you have a really good memory with their child, something that you did with them, a trip that you took together, whatever it might be, ask them if you can share that with them. Because I can tell you, there's nothing that warms a grieving parent's heart more than hearing somebody else talk about their child. Wouldn't you agree with that?
I completely agree. And I understand that people are trying to avoid hurting us.
Oh, yeah.
But one of our biggest fears as a parent who lost a child is that our child will be forgotten.
Absolutely.
And I think that that's important to realize for other people. I have precious people that still call me on Nicole's birthday and on her heaven day.
Yeah.
I don't usually answer the phone, but they leave me a message thinking about Nicole. And sometimes they give me a memory, or they might send me a picture. And those things are so precious. And when the kids talk about it, like we talked about Alex, Nicole kind of took him under her wing for that year before she went to heaven. And he gave her a run for her money. And so we always say it's a funny story. And she goes, "Why are you so crabby, Alex?" And he goes, "You're crabby right now." So we always say that. We just always say, "You're crabby right now," because it was one of those things we laughed about. And, there was many things like that. It's really important to mention their child's name, tell stories, send pictures, ask permission first. Would it be okay if I shared this with you? Because if they're having a hard time right then, it may be where their heart can't handle it. So ask permission first, but just say, I'm thinking about Ryan today. And I have a funny story about him. Is it okay if I share it with you? Because they've said his name, and that it warms your heart, because then you go, oh, he's remembered.
Absolutely. That is so well said. Kim, I want you to talk a little bit about your book. I mentioned it at the outset of the podcast. And the name of your book is Victorious Heart: Finding Hope and Healing After a Devastating Loss. So how many years was it after you guys lost Nicole that you came to the point where you could write that book? And tell us a little bit about what your purpose was in it, and what your prayer is for those people who have read or who will read it.
It was about 20 years when I started writing. It was a very long process because I'm not a natural writer, but it was so cool because I felt like the Lord was telling me to do it. And so he did it. And so the purpose for me was really important. I was no expert about grief, but I knew what helped me and I knew what didn't help me. And so throughout the book, it's really important. You'll hear it and read it often. Make sure you give yourself grace to grieve the way that you need to. Give yourself space. It's over and over and over mentioned in the book. And at the end of each chapter, I have two sections, kind of cliff notes. One is called Loving Them Well, and that helps the other people that are walking with the griever. It kind of gives here's some hints for you.
That's really important.
Yeah, like during the service, and they're doing this and this, but it's very practical. It starts in right. I tell the story about the accident, and then I talk about it's very practical, but it's my heart, and It goes from the service to fun memories of her to birthdays and anniversaries. There are all the topics that I felt like were hard. There also, in addition to loving them well, there's another section, and it's the cliff notes about, okay, here's some things from this chapter that you can apply. Because we know, you had mentioned COVID brain, we know how hard it is to to think clearly and to concentrate. And I couldn't go through a lot of words, but that was really important because I could sum it up. So if somebody had a hard time reading the whole chapter, they could read that end this time. And maybe in a couple of years, they might want to read that. And so it was really important that I could let people know they're not alone and that they're going to make it through their grief. Last year, I had the opportunity to record it for audio. And that was actually another layer of grief, reading my own words about our experience. I was exhausted for those months that I was reading it.
Yeah,
But
I'll bet you were.
It was so healing, though, because I realized, and it actually really made me realize how much the Lord was with me. I realized, wow, I don't remember saying that. And I would know that it's the Holy Spirit giving me those words.
Wow. I want to go back to something that you said just a few seconds ago. And you said that you're not an expert. You're a grieving mom. I would say that makes you more of an expert than who we typically think of as an expert. You cannot be an expert on this kind of grief, the grief journey, the healing journey, and all that goes into that. The things that we've talked about today and a lot more that we just don't have the time to talk about. I think that's what makes you an expert. And I think that type of expertise is what connects people's hearts, those who are in a different season of grieving, and they want to get their hands on anything they can that they think might help them. I think that experts like you, Kim, are the ones that people want to connect with because you've lived it. You don't just have the knowledge. You have the experience. You've walked through the pain. You've walked through the hurt, and you're still doing that today, but you're in such a better place than you were 26 years ago. I think those are the connections that I think God loves to make. Somebody who's walked through what we're walking through already that can give us a real perspective and that can encourage us and give us we know that the hope they offer is real hope.
And that's a good point. We've walked through it. We've walked through it through the days that we thought we would not survive. And it's interesting. The name of the book is Victoria's Heart. A friend of mine gave me a little bookmark that had the meaning of her name, Nicole, and it was Victoria's Heart.
You're kidding.
And no. And I thought all the years, I thought that's the name. That's what I want to live like. Because she lived with a victorious heart every day. And I wanted to live with a victorious heart in my grief. And it is possible. It is really possible.
Yes, it is.
We have a lot of scars and we're worn out and it's hard. But we do have the capacity to have a victorious heart.
Yes, we do. And I appreciate you sharing that. Kim, it's been such an honor to have you on our podcast today, and I have so enjoyed this conversation. And, for those who are listening today, I did want to let them know that Kim does have a website, and it's www.victoriousheart.com. You can find Kim's blog, and you can find, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Kim, there's a way for them to contact you if they would like. Is that still the case?
Yes, and it's actually wildvictoriousheart.com.
I apologize.
And yes, I have some blogs, and I try to respond to every email. During the holidays, it may take me a little longer, but if you need to contact me, I would love to hear from you. And it gives a link to both the Audible book and the hardcover.
And those can be found in any of the major book outlets, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah.
Now, and Kim, I wanted to ask you this too, because I think I remember seeing on your website an option for if someone's interested in having you to come and speak. Are you still doing that?
Yes, I am. I'm booked out through the beginning of the year, through February. But yes, and it can be small groups or a larger group. I've spoken to 10 women or 300 women. And my topics are typically for women, just because I was the mom. I
Sure.
am the mom, but I'm not limited. I really like to feel open to whatever the Lord is leading.
That is such good stuff. And again, Kim's website is www.wildvictoriousheart.com. And please pick up a copy of her book in whatever form you would like to access. I think it will give you some encouragement and hope without a doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Again, Kim Peacock, what a blessing to have you today. Thank you for opening up your heart and sharing the story of your life and your sweet daughter, Nicole.
Thank you so much for having me, Greg. It's been a blessing.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us today. If you would like to offer your thoughts on today's episode, simply click the link under the episode summary. And if you're interested in sharing your story on a future episode, email us using the provided link. Join us again in 2 weeks to hear another story of how God meets us in our pain, creates something beautiful from the broken pieces, and restores meaning, purpose, and hope.